I think so much of our disillusionment with the world right now is because we're looking for other people to define who we are, to define our places. I'm looking to my president or my politics or my pastor or my neighbor or a writer I admire or a person I hate or a person I love to sort of push me into the corner of my identity. And I think the importance of being able to say, I'm here and this is my place, is it's almost like a courageous act.
Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. We long to see the body of Christ look like Jesus. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. Our show is powered by you, the listener. So if you want to support the work that we do, get early access to episodes, episode guides, and more, go to patreon.com/shiftingculture to become a monthly patron so that we can continue in this important work. And don't forget to hit the follow button on your favorite podcast app to be notified when new episodes come out each week. And go leave a rating and review. It's easy. It only takes a second, and it helps us find new listeners to the show. Just go to the show page on the app that you're using right now and hit 5 stars. Thank you so much. You know what else would help us out? Share this podcast with your friends, your family, your network. Tell them how much you enjoy it and let them know that they should be listening as well. If you are new here, welcome. If you want to dig deeper, find us on social media at Shifting Culture Podcast, where I post video clips and quotes and interact with all of you. Previous guests on the show have included Emily P. Freeman, Sarah Bessey, and Jen Pollock-Michelle. You could go back, listen to those episodes, and more. But today's guest is Laurie Ferguson Wilbert. Laurie Ferguson Wilbert is an award-winning writer, thinker, learner, and author of the books The Understory, A Curious Faith, and Handle with Care. She has written for She Reads Truth, Christianity Today, and more, as well as her own site, LaurieWilbert.com. She has a master's in spiritual formation and leadership and loves to think and write about the intersection of human formation and the gritty stuff of earth. You can find Laurie on Instagram at LaurieWilbert or on her kayak in the Adirondacks. She lives with her husband, Nate, in upstate New York and their pups, Harper and Rilka. She really has read all the books on her shelves. You know, I love to enter the woods, find a path, and walk with Jesus. It is a place of life and connection for me, and I know it is for Laurie as well. Laurie Wilbert spent time reflecting on the forest floor for her latest book, The Understory. In this conversation, Laurie and I talk about finding identity and community through change and loss. Laurie talks about learning from nature by observing decay and emergence on the forest floor, seeing death as part of life's cycle. In times of loss, Laurie encourages us to feel emotions fully and trust that God is still at work, like nutrients from fallen trees, nourishing new growth, and that moving forward through change requires accepting the new normal and focusing on being present each day rather than clinging to the past. So join us as we find rootedness and resilience from the forest floor. Here is my conversation with Laurie Ferguson Wilbert. Laurie, welcome to Shifting Culture. Thanks for joining me. I'm really excited to have you.
Thanks for having me, Josh. Josh or Joshua?
Joshua is great.
Okay, Joshua.
I answer to Josh. There's lots of people call me Josh, but
I have a brother named Josh, and I call him Joshua, and
yeah.
So I like it. I prefer it.
All right, that's good. Well, Joshua actually has a meaning. I don't think that Josh really means anything, so I like Joshua.
Does it mean God saves? Is that?
Yes, salvation belongs to the Lord.
To the
is
Lord,
what it means. So, yeah, and so that's been a big theme in my life is my name and who I am, and finding that salvation in the Lord. I want to know can you articulate your story of faith with Jesus in just a few minutes and how it has grown and shaped over time?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's like, which story should I tell? Should I tell this part of the story or this part or this part? But I think overall, raised in a pretty, I would say, fundamentalist Christian home, Christian patriarchy, that sort of thing. I did not have a very clear idea about Jesus or grace or sin or any of those things, my idea of God was sort of like the genie in the bottle. Like, do good things, rub it 3 times, and all the good things will pop out for you. And in my late 20s, that just, wasn't working at all because it's not meant to work. And so I kind of just walked away from all of it for a time, if not in my body, at least in my mind. I was employed by a church at that point. I wasn't getting the answers I wanted. I tend to be a little bit of like a dog with a bone when it comes to questions. And so I kind of I would call myself an agnostic for several years in there. And yeah, just didn't, it felt like this God couldn't exist. This sort of, if God was good, God did what we wanted God to do, and that didn't happen. So that wasn't a good God. And ultimately that sort of search, because I am like a dog with a bone and I wouldn't let go of that search, and God wouldn't let go of me searching, led me to move from New York to Texas. And I heard the gospel of Jesus so clearly articulated. The gospel, understanding my sin, understanding brokenness, understanding redemption and grace and goodness and the faithfulness of God for all generations. And it just sort of radically changed my life from that point on. It's pretty delved into sort of the neo-reformed world at that point, and it kind of just had stars in my eyes about so many things, and was just like soaking so many things up, just learning so many things. And I don't think I was really able to see how so much of that time was just like sort of building crutches around myself in some ways. Like, I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust the Holy Spirit inside of me. It felt risky to follow Jesus alone. And so I sort of leaned on church and leaned on institutions and leaned on theology and leaned in all these various places. And I would say in the last probably 8 years, 7, 8 years, as we just watched so many institutions and so much theology and just like things just fall apart, for me, I realized, well, if I'm not oriented around Jesus, if Jesus isn't the center of this, then I'm a lost cause. And so this is just going to be cultural Christianity for me. And I think that has been one of the best things that ever happened to me, because it's Jesus now. It's Jesus alone, and he is the one I worship, and he's the one I want to build my life around, and he's the one I want to emulate. He's the one I want to learn from. And I feel like I feel so like rooted and grounded in God's love in a way that before it still felt, even though I didn't believe in the sort of genie God anymore, I still felt like, well, I have to have good theology, and I have to be part of a good church, and I have to have a good I have to have all these things, good politics or whatever. And now I'm just like, no, it's like, I count it all. It's lost. So that's where I am. Yeah.
Well, I think, the last, 5, 6, 8 years, whatever, I call it the great unveiling. That it's unveiling where we're actually putting our hope in. And our hope has been in institutions. It's been in those crutches. Like you said, these are the crutches that I had. And so I was just reflecting on, after digging into your book, The Understory, which I love, and it is a balm to my soul. Your writing is beautiful. It's gorgeous. I just love your book.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But so this unveiling, the reflection that I had is I actually am getting to be very empathetic for people that have used anger and authoritarianism, and like they're trying to hold on to something that they feel is being taken away, that they're losing, and they don't know what else to hold on to. And I'm starting to feel some empathy.
Yeah.
Where before I'm like, okay, just get over it and let's move towards Jesus.
Yeah.
What is your relationship with that now, the people and the culture around you, as people are holding on and seeing you saying, okay, I've let go of some of that and I'm now just holding on to Jesus, and it makes people a little bit angry. How has that been in your life lately?
That's such like, I love that question so much, Joshua. Like, that's such an insightful question. And I love so much that you talked about coming to have empathy for them, because that has been, I mean, that really is so much the story of the Understory for me, was having grace for my own story and learning to have grace for the process and the stories of others. So Mary Oliver has this poem where she says, oh God, I want to quote the whole thing, but it's like,
You could read a Mary Oliver poem. I'm okay with that.
I don't have it in front of me, but basically the last line of it is, things take the time they take. And I think when I look at my own story, I just think like, man, I have been 70 different kinds of blind, and I still am. Like, there's so much more for me to learn and grow and change. And I think I had this belief that, like, because I believed God was unchanging, therefore I had to be unchanging. I had to be like, as the waves in the sand was shifting around me, I had to somehow be immovable. And I just don't, when I actually read the Bible, that's not the God I see. I see a God who like bends toward his people. And I see a God who's like sometimes changes his mind about things. And so when I begin to see that and I understand, oh, I'm made in the image of God, that means I should change and morph and grow as well. And therefore, man, that just like blows open the expanse of empathy toward everyone around me. Like, I just have so much empathy for the people who might be what I perceive to be behind me in a specific area, or even the people who I might perceive to be ahead of me in another area. It's been really interesting in my marriage. My husband and I are like not aligned on some pretty big things. And it's just so easy to have empathy for him and to receive his empathy for me and to learn and grow together. And so I actually think that like having my trust in institutions and the church and people totally broken, putting my trust in Jesus has enabled me to have a more expansive life and to welcome in those other people, because I don't feel like they're like a threat to my way of life anymore. So why would I not invite them in and have as much empathy as I can manage? Now, that said, there are going to be times where, just because God is love, God also has anger about injustice and wrongdoing. And so I have to learn to hold both empathy for a perspective while also not like softening against injustice and things like that. Like, I can be rooted and grounded in the love of God while at the same time caring about the things that I perceive God cares about.
Let's go into some of your story from the Understory. I want to start like moving from Dallas area into the Adirondacks back to where a lot of the place that you grew up. What was that process like as you, I want to know, I mean, because all of this, the Understory, of course, you're talking about the forest floor. So this is not Dallas area analogy. This is what you're seeing out your window, the Adirondacks. This is not what you're seeing out your window in Dallas. How has place and the place that you were at, how has place shifted, changed you, and brought you to a different place? What is the place do for you?
That's such an interesting question. There's this beautiful line in a Wendell Berry poem, To Think of a Life of a Man, where he talks about being at peace and in place. And I would say that has been, for as long as I have known, that has been a goal of mine in my life. Like, I have this sort of constant wanderlust, constant sort of nostalgia for this sense of home. And I've never lived in a place longer than 4 years in my life. And so when I think about the word home, or I think about being at peace and in place, it's a sort of very hard thing for me to grasp. And so coming back here, while in some ways it was coming home, in other ways it was it was really stripping away any illusions I had that a place itself can be home. And so much of the book is about the recognition that I am here, like right where my feet are right now is where I am. And whether that's in Dallas or DC or Denver or here, other places I've lived, like that doesn't have to be home. It just means that's my place for that moment. And I think that has been really transformational for me as well, because when I think about it, I'm like, oh, I'm here and God is here with me in this place. God is here with me. So while, yes, I thrive in a place like the forest where there's, beautiful trees and soft mossy carpet, more than I thrive in a place like Dallas where it's a lot of concrete and suburbs, that doesn't change the fact that like the God is with me in that place and I am here. And there's this other beautiful line. I wish I could remember who says it, but I think I quoted at the end of the book where it talks about going from here to here to here instead of from here to there. And I really love that picture of we don't always have to be moving from point A to point B to point C to point, like that's not what life is like. That's not what growth is like. It's more just like an acknowledgement of where I am right now and looking to where I will be tomorrow, knowing that that's not where I'll be for the rest of my life.
So what's the importance of finding here, wherever here is, where you are at the present moment? I think one of the beautiful things that you write about in your book is the moment where Moses goes up, he sees God says, to take off your shoes. This is holy ground. This is sacred. This ground is sacred, and this is holy. And you write a little bit about afterwards that we take our shoes off to make it holy. Every place that we are is sacred ground, right? And I like that image of the foot on the ground, like feeling your place, knowing that you are here. What's the importance of feeling, of like being present in that place?
I think so much of our disillusionment with the world right now is because we're looking for other people to define who we are, to define our places. I'm looking to my president or my politics or my pastor or my neighbor or a writer I admire or a person I hate or a person I love to sort of push me into the corner of my identity. And I think the importance of being able to say, I'm here and this is my place is it's almost like a courageous act to say, I'm choosing to not absorb that way of being or that way of thinking, or I'm choosing to not be pushed into the corner by the beliefs and habits and rhythms and theology of other people. I'm choosing to acknowledge my doubts right where I am, choosing to acknowledge what I love right where I am, choosing to acknowledge what I want, what I don't want. There's this wonderful book by Susan Howich called Glittering Images. And have you heard of it?
Yeah, I've read it. I've read the book. I love it.
Okay.
It was assigned in my college English class. We didn't get to it. I read it that summer, and I just fell in love with it. It was amazing.
have met so few people who've read it, so I love that you've read it. Man, I love it so much, and I don't want to give too much away to your listeners, but like it's really about facing ourselves as we are, and not having any illusions about who we are, because we can't actually heal if we don't bring our whole self to the work of healing and formation. So I love the way that she sort of paints a picture and tells a story about that, because I think we can see ourselves in that. If we're willing, we can all do with some acknowledging our glittering images.
Yes. And I think that's a beautiful thing, that we're here, we're in place, we're rooted wherever we are, even if our life is transient, as you have lived in many different places as an adult. Your life is transient, but you can be rooted in here. And I think as we continue to move throughout our life, we need to find
Yeah.
that place. And that place is, for me, I mean, that identity place can't be somebody else defining my identity. It has to be God saying, hey, you're a beloved child.
Yeah.
You're with me. This is my identity. And I think that was what the beautiful thing about the early church for me was that their whole identity was found in Jesus, that
Yeah.
for the first time in history, there was rich and poor, there were slave and there were free. There were all sorts of people coming together, kissing on the cheek and saying, being welcoming and saying our identity is together in Jesus. And it's not in all these external things the world defines us as. Have you seen any community? I mean, you get to this place of looking for a community like that here now. Have you started to see any sort of community now like that where we're finding our identity in Him, in Jesus, and not in these external things? And what does that look like?
I'm going to get real vulnerable for a minute and tell you. So we've been here 4 years this month, actually, and we have not had a church home in 4 years because we've been unable to find that. And I do think it exists. I've had tastes of it. I was in a grad school program for several years, and I think I had a taste of that where, we're coming from all different spaces of life, and yet we are united around Jesus, and it was beautiful. But it's temporary. It was a grad school environment, and it was, I think, in some ways parasocial because we were coming from all sort of places. We weren't coming from a central location. I do think it exists. I do think also, so I do think it exists. I also think, as you said at the beginning of this conversation, we're in a great unveiling. And I think the beauty of being someone who is living through that experience, as you are as well, is that we can hold on to the hope of this really beautiful thing while also acknowledging, everybody, it's just the church is going through some havoc right now. And I think that havoc is good. I think it's revealing some necessary things, and I think it's beautiful, and I have a lot of hope for future generations. But no. The short answer is no. I haven't seen it the way that so I'm going to say this. Actually, so I have a really healthy marriage. We fight. We have squabbles. We're in a really sucky season right now of our lives, but we have a generally healthy marriage. And I think oftentimes people say oh, home is where you can kind of be the worst version of yourself. And I've always held the belief that home should be the place where I am the best version of myself. The person with whom I live should receive the best of me. And that's not always true, but I want it to be true. And so I think even if we can make our homes places where we are bearing the fruit of the Spirit, where we are long-suffering, where we are confessing, a confessional community. I'm confessing to you I'm angry. I'm confessing to you I'm sad. I'm confessing to you I've sinned. I think that can be a really powerful and beautiful place to begin. I wish I saw it in more churches, but it's where I am right now. And I have to acknowledge that I'm not seeing it where I am. But I have to believe that it exists, either somewhere else today or somewhere in the future.
Well, I don't think that things will change unless what you just said, as you're embodying it at home.
Yeah.
That is community. I mean, where two or more are gathered, that two is a community. It's a marriage, it's a community. You are embodying that. That's going to start to have an effect on the wider community. It has to start somewhere. And it should start with us.
I love that you say that. So we live right abutted up against a river. I'm looking at a river right now, and it's in this little sort of enclave of neighbors. None of them are believers, total heathens. One is raving liberal. The other is, they had a Confederate flag hanging on their porch, opposite ends of the spectrum, and wouldn't talk to each other. for years. They would have nothing to do with each other. And we moved here right in between them. And last summer, we had a tree fall in front of our house. There was this moment where I was sitting out on our front steps watching the men come remove the tree. And our neighbor from this side and our neighbor from this side both came and joined me on the stairs. That would have never happened 5 years ago, ever. Not in a million years. It would have never happened. I'm not saying that was us. I am saying that I think that both of those families know that there's something. I mean, we have pretty candid conversations with them too, but they know that, okay, this is sort of a neutral zone. We can lay down our arms for a few minutes in this place, and they can. It's a place of peace, and it's a place of welcome, and we're not going to shy away from those conversations. Like, we will have those conversations. That Confederate flag is no longer hanging on their porch, but it's not a place of combat. It's not a war zone.
Yeah. So as you've been looking out your window and you've been taking walks and you've been walking the forests and in the trees, what did you start to learn as you started to look down and started to reflect on death and decay and reemergence on the forest floor? There aren't a lot of people that look down. A lot of people see what's ahead of them. So how did you start to look at the floor, and what can we learn from the forest floor?
I like that you said a lot of people look ahead of them. Yeah, it's true. We do. We often do that. I think it started for me, and I start the book out with a story of the tallest tree in New York fell recently, and it's not far from my house, and a friend of mine was the one to find it when it first fell. And so he and I hiked back to it a couple years ago, and I was just really struck by this like queen, this like beautiful, beautiful tree that was now laying on her side in this old growth forest. And I went home and I started to like read everything I could about her. And one of the things that a local forestry professor said was, dead, yes, but I prefer to think she's just not vertical anymore. And that idea that like, even in her, what we might call death, and it was a dramatic death, like not a gentle death, not a pretty one. What we might call death was actually just the beginning of no, not even the beginning. It was just part of the life cycle. It is a natural disturbance. It is necessary. Some scientists say that a natural tree fall in a forest is one of the most necessary events for a forest, for the health of a forest. And in the 300, 400 years she's going to take to decompose, she's going to provide nutrients and a rich, rich ground for new healthy trees to grow. And I'm so struck by that. And once I began to think about that, like, I just began to see death everywhere. And instead of being this like very sad thing, it became an incredibly hopeful thing. It actually became me like looking ahead and being like, that's exciting. That process is actually really cool and really exciting. And that's why when you talk about like the unveiling that we're experiencing, I'm like, yeah, we're just not vertical anymore. Like, cool. Like, some really cool stuff is about to happen. We get to become some like fungi and like moss. Like, we get to become the body upon which like some really cool, absolutely necessary things in the forest grow. Like, the most integral things in a forest, the things that make a forest are not actually the trees. It's actually what's happening on the forest floor. Because it couldn't be a healthy forest without that stuff. It would just be, I mean, you've seen those like really unhealthy pine plantations. It's like not a healthy forest because it doesn't have those necessary, it doesn't have that death process and decay and decomposition. So we need that too. We're not exempt from that just because we loved this.
It feels like, I mean, you've gone through a lot. And like in the middle of your book, you're talking about hurt and grief and loss and pain. There's a lot of death, right? In the middle of your of your book is there, and looking at out the window, and there looks like there's death underneath all that snow, and you can't see anything growing, you can't see any life. If people are there, because there's a lot of people there right now, there's tons of people that are there in hurt and grief and loss, whether it be betrayal of the church, whether it be the death of a loved one, broken relationships, whatever it may be. What can you say to them as you've started to learn from what is happening when there is death and decay, and is there any hope coming for the people that are in that space right now?
I think the first thing I would say is, like, I'm really sorry that you're going through this. Like, it's nothing I can say is going to fix or take away or make the pain go. Again, Mary Oliver, things take the time they take. Oh, the rest of that poem is things take the time they take. How many roads did St. Augustine take before he became St. Augustine? That's the rest of the poem. And I think that, to me, is like, yeah, there's some roads you're going to have to traverse before you get to be who you want to be, and before you can see yourself as you truly are, as you are loved and seen and cared for by God. And that's just going to take time. I think I would also say maybe some of us need to look up, but some of us need to look down and see where your feet are. Andrew Peterson has this beautiful song that just came out on the new Porter's Gate album. I think it's Andrew Peterson and maybe Leslie, can't remember their last name. It's called Centering Prayer, I think. And the line of it is just be where your feet are. And so I would just say that would be my encouragement to these friends who are in that space, is just be where your feet are. If you're feeling anger, let it rip. If you're feeling grief, let it rip. If you're feeling, just like, God cares about those feelings, and God wants to minister to those feelings. Like, he wants to minister healing and hope and goodness to those feelings. And we can't receive that goodness if we won't let ourselves feel it. So
that's good. How did you learn how to feel?
Oh my goodness, that's a whole other podcast, Joshua. I am not a big feeler. I am by nature, I stuff all my feelings down. I pretend I think about my feelings rather than feel my feelings. And you ask, how did you learn to feel? I actually asked God. I said, God, would you help me cry? Would you help me feel anger? Would you help me to not run away from my tears and run away from anger? And the Lord has answered. And I have found, I still remind myself at times when I feel like tears start to well up. This is good. Don't apologize for that. Feel those tears. Say what you're feeling. Don't say you think you're feeling this. Just say, I'm feeling this. And, going back to what I said about community and my relationship with my husband, I think that has been incredibly powerful in our relationship, for us to be able to say, because we can both kind of run away from feelings. For us to both be able to say, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm sad, I'm grieving, whatever. And it's only borne good fruit in my relationships.
That's good. I mean, yeah, I don't want to name names. I do know people that, like, tears come. They're like, I apologize. I'm sorry. I'll be better. But it's okay. Yeah. Just be there. Be sad. Cry. Show your emotion. Feel your emotion. And say, be honest. This is where I'm at. And it's okay to be there. You're not broken because of that. And I think that's sometimes, especially thinkers, writers, they think that, oh, if I feel my feelings, I'm broken and I need to get over it. And so, you've gotten to a place of, like, okay, I could feel my feelings. How could people start to move past that and not think that they're broken because they're sad or angry at the moment?
I kind of want people to just like close their eyes and envision the tallest tree in New York again. And that tallest tree in New York falling in a forest, and the thunderous sound it made several sticks of dynamite. That was the sound it made when it fell.
So if no one saw it, it did make a sound.
It did make a sound. Yeah. I think just imagine that for a minute. Just imagine like, okay, if I'm gonna let myself feel, I'm gonna like make a lot of sound and I'm gonna fall. And then just remember that forestry professor's quote again. Maybe it's just not vertical anymore. So you're just as important and just as essential and just as alive and just as whole on your side as you are standing up. And in some ways, I'm going to argue that you are even more whole and more essential and more like powerful to the community of trees around you by having fallen than you were ever in your 400 years of life, standing and being noble among the pines. And so let yourself fall. Just like let yourself trust that there's still good happening, even though you're not vertical anymore. And I know that's incredible. It's so much easier to say than to do. But I truly think that's the way that we become fully formed whole humans, is to fall.
So as you fall, we're in this grief, things are taking time, we're letting it take time. What does emergence look like coming out of that death season, and we're now emerging into something new? And even if you take the church, as the church falls, it crumbles, the institution, there's going to be an emergence of something new, and it's going to be beautiful and different, but it is going to revolve around Jesus. What does that process look like, and what did you find?
I'll say this, it's a slow process. While I was writing the book, I watched the process of decomposition sped up in a YouTube video, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. It happened, the whole video was like, a minute and a half, and yet it had taken like 2.5 months to get to this like loamy soil space. And I just think like we want the sped up version, we want the fast version. That's just not how things happen. That's not how it happens in nature, and that's not how we are part of nature, and it's not how it happens with us. And so the emergence, I think, it's going to look a lot less dramatic maybe than we would like for it to look. Little saplings are not very dramatic. They're beautiful, but they're not dramatic. They're not towering pines in a forest. And so I think we need to, if I'm really honest, I think we need to go where the death is. I think that's where our emergence is going to happen. So we need to go to the spaces where we perceive the absence of life. And, that for some person could be like leaving a mega church and going to a mainline church. That could mean leaving your comfortable suburban house and moving to an urban place, or moving to Gaza. It could mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people, but I think one of the reasons that we're in the space where we are is because we've chased after things that look like life, just because they're loud and attractive and seeker sensitive and those kinds of things. But I think the real stuff, the real good stuff to come is going to happen where we're seeing a lot of death. That was a real cheerful answer. Sorry.
Right. Thanks for that cheerful answer. I'm just reflecting on my own life.
Yeah.
And I know that the places in my life where I've had the most life is where I ran towards death. My wife and I lived in the Middle East. We worked with Syrian refugees for many years. And I mean, that's the trauma, death, war coming out of it. And we saw so much life. It was incredible. But my question is, we're running to death, how can I not get my own sense of self-worth and self-importance out of the life that I think I'm bringing to death?
Oh, That's so good. I mean, that is really, that's our human, like, that's the human paradox, right? You know, we're not Jesus. We are not the Christ. And I don't think that's ever going to be, we believe we're our own gods. We are looking around us for gods. We want other people to see us as gods. So the whole work of being human in the world is just being, it's like saying, I am not the Christ. I am not God. I orient my life around Jesus. I am not the center of life. And so I guess my answer to that is I have no idea. Like, I have no idea what it's going to take. You should expect it to come. There is going to be a crushing in your life that leads you to realize I am not the Christ. I hate thinking that you would experience some of the things that I've experienced in my life. Like, that would break my heart. And yet, like, you're going to experience far worse things probably in some ways than I've experienced. And these are all reminders that we are not the center of, we are not the one we worship. And I think, you know, someone I think does a really good job of talking about this. And so I just want to point to his work. And I think you may have interviewed him, was Brian Zond. I just think Brian does such a great job just talking through what it looks like to sort of like turn away from our own selves and turn toward Jesus. And I've learned so much from him around these things. And so I guess my encouragement to your listeners would be, go read Brian Zahn's work.
There you go. Go read Brian Zahn. Listen to my 2 interviews I've done with him. I love Brian, and he lives about 45 minutes away from me. But I have never met him in person other than
really?
over the computer as we've talked on this podcast. But yeah, Brian's fantastic to be able to orient ourselves around Jesus and what that looks like and moving forward. So if you say to people, how now, when we're seeing the unveiling, we're seeing death and decay all around us, we're going through this grief and loss, we're starting to see some little saplings, we have a little bit of emergence. What does like long-term then like resilience look like to move us forward in our lives?
Mm-hmm. So in 400 years, tree 103 is not going to, that was the tree that fell, is not going to be there anymore. Like, to the naked eye, tree 103 is not going to be there anymore. But the nutrients that tree 103 has left behind is going to be there for eternity. Like, she has changed the ecological layout of that forest. And so no matter what, she is here. She is there. And aspects of her are there. And so I think I just lost what your question was, which is
moving towards resilience, long-term resilience.
I think we need to change our idea of what resilience is. I think we have this idea of resilience that it's like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and like go back to what you used to be and try and regain this sense of strength that you used to have, or like rebuild these relationships that you used to have. And I want to say, no, I don't think it's any of those things. I think it's a new thing, and I think it's another new thing, and another new thing, and another new thing, a whole new cellular arrangement every single day that allows like future generations to build upon us and the death and decay that we might be experiencing right now. And so I guess I want to say, and this might not sound super hopeful, but I'm not sure that any of us are going to be big trees in our future. I think we're in an age when a lot of the big trees have fallen, and some of our descendants might see some big trees again, or might become big trees themselves. But I think for us in 2024, resilience is accepting the unveiling. It is saying this is the new normal, and I'm going to be here in it, and I'm not going to try and get back to yesterday or try to rush toward some sort of future version of myself. I'm going to be here. And what that's looked like for my husband and I in a time where we just haven't had a church in good Lord, we've tried, has just been like not letting go of the grief of that, not just sort of resigning ourselves to, well, this is just where we are. And spoiler alert, moving. Like, we're gonna be moving. We don't know where, we don't know when, but we're putting our house on the market at the end of the month because we deeply need a community of people around us. But in the meantime, it has been saying, this is where we are, and we can trust that God is at work in this place. And that is emergence. That is movement. That is a little bit of looking up from sort of the destruction that we're seeing, the grief that we're seeing around us.
That's so beautiful and good. Laurie, if you could speak to your readers and the people that are going to read your book, which I hope everybody does because it is beautiful, what do you hope people will get from the Understory?
I think permission to just be where they are. And maybe that's the most important thing. Permission to be who they are. Andy Crouch has this beautiful statement where he says to flourish is to be magnificently ourselves. And I think my hope in this book, whose message is so much about being here, is that people would just be able to be themselves, whether that's their grieving selves, their Republican selves, their Reformed selves, their Methodist selves, their single mother selves, their gay selves. Like, I want people to be who they are and to be able to receive the love of God for that space, in that place, and to trust that God is at work in their lives moving forward.
That's great. Yeah, I have just a couple of questions I'd like to ask at the end. One is, if you could go back to your 21-year-old self, what advice would you give?
Oh, I literally just yesterday on Instagram said, letter to my former self.
So you just did it.
Yeah, I did. Trust your gut, girl. Trust your gut. Emily Freeman has this quote that says, small red flags rarely become smaller. They mostly become bigger. And I've just seen that to be true in my life. And I just wish 99% of the time when I looked around me for what to do, I just wish I would have just like been still for a minute and checked in with my gut, because there have been very few times where my gut has led me wrong. And I've come to think, as someone who's oriented around Jesus now, I've come to think of my gut, my intuition, as the voice of the Holy Spirit within me. So trust your gut, girl.
So good. Anything you've been reading, watching lately you could recommend?
Oh, we're reading.
You don't read much, do you?
I read a ton. I read probably, gosh, what have I read recently? I'm like, my mind is drawing a blank because I'm probably reading so much. I know what I'm reading. I'm reading Leaf Angers currently. I'm reading his book, I Cheerfully Refuse. And I love Leaf Anger. I think he's the best novelist of our century. And so this book is not doing him wrong. I Cheerfully Refuse. I'm also, my husband and I finished We Were the Lucky Ones. It's a World War II miniseries on Hulu. We finished that this week. And I thought it was really well done. I don't think I've seen a miniseries from that perspective of World War II. And it's a dark story, and I think it should be a dark story. It should be a story that makes us think about the choices that our world makes when it comes to image bearers. We also just watched, I don't know if you've seen Little Drummer Girl, which is based off a John le Carre novel. It's a mini series, and I really love it. It also has to do with Israel and Israelis, but it shows the Palestinian view as well. And I felt, we've watched it probably 4 times. We love it so much. It's such a great miniseries. So well done. But it was really good for us to watch it, I think, recently, just to remind ourselves of how complex this is and yet how beautiful humans are. All humans.
Yep, that's
So,
true.
yeah.
Yeah. All humans deserve to flourish.
Yeah.
They deserve a flourishing life.
Yeah.
That's good. Laurie, if you could say, where would you like to connect people to? How could they connect with you? Where would you like to point people to? How could people go get your book?
They can get my book. I don't know when this releases, but they can get my book anywhere books are sold. They can connect with me. I mostly hang out on LaurieWilbert.com, LOREWYLBERT.com, and Instagram at Laurie Wilbert. That's really the only social media I'm hanging out on these days.
Excellent. Well, go there, go to LaurieWilbert.com, sign up for Laurie's Substack and get more of her writing, because your writing is awesome and beautiful no matter what, whether it be your books or your emails and your Substack. It's great. So you would not do wrong to read Laurie's words, because they're beautiful.
Thank you.
So do that. So Laurie, thank you for this conversation. Thank you that you were able to actually walk into the unveiling with me, that you could say that there is death and decay there, and that you were able to learn from the forest floor as you've been walking those things, and that even the fall of the great trees, which are a lot of our institutions and churches, will actually bring about some new saplings and new growth and nutrients for the forest floor. And we can't have really any good growth unless we have death and decay, and to move through it as well. So thank you. I really, really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. Thanks, Joshua.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you want to see more episodes like this, go to patreon.com/shiftingculture and become a monthly patron of the show. You can help us produce more episodes so that we can see the body of Christ look more like Jesus. If you become a patron on patreon.com/shiftingculture, you will get early access to episodes. You will get episode guides. You will get bonus shows, hopefully, and more. So go to patreon.com/shiftingculture and become a monthly patron. Also, leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps us out and helps us find new listeners to the show. And just go and share this podcast with your friends, your family, your network, people that you think would enjoy it as well. Thank you again for listening to the show. I hope you have a great week.